Thank you.
Judge, if you just give me just a minute here to kind of stage.
Okay.
I'm going to get my notes out. I'm just going to usher him out.
Okay.
Call Dr. Eric Warren, Your Honor.
Witness sworn.
All right, Dr. Warren. I'm now realizing I didn't make copies of your CV, so let's tell the jury what your name is.
My name is Eric Warren. That's spelled E-R-I-C. Last name is W-A-R-R-E-N.
Okay, and tell the jury where you live just generally.
So I live near Memphis, Tennessee.
All right, and what do you do for a living?
So I own my own company. It's called SEP Forensic Consultants. So SEP Forensic Consultants, where I routinely provide, as the name suggests, consulting in various areas of forensics, to include firearm and tool mark identification, as well as crime scene reconstruction and shooting incident reconstruction.
Okay, and what's your highest level of education? Just tell the jury how.
So I have a bachelor's degree in molecular and cellular biology with a minor in chemistry, and I have a doctorate in biochemistry and molecular biophysics, both of which are from Vanderbilt University.
And in terms of your work experience, just give the jury some idea of kind of the evolution of your employment circumstances since you got out of college.
So after I earned my doctorate degree, I was applied to and hired by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, or the TBI. During my tenure there, I was a special agent forensic scientist. That interim time, I was assigned to the Firearm and Tool Mark Identification Unit, and so part of that initial 2 years was an on-the-job training program set forth by the guidelines of the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners, which I call AFTE for short. After I completed that successfully, I was signed off on independent casework, where I continued to do that until I left to start my own company. In addition to that, I was assigned to the Violent Crime Response Team, or VCRT, where I would routinely leave the laboratory and actually go respond to a scene when law enforcement agencies had a particularly violent crime scene that they needed assistance with in either tracking down leads or solving that particular crime.
So you worked for the state of Tennessee, right?
Yes, I did.
And is that like you work for law enforcement?
Yes, I was law enforcement. I was sworn during that entire time.
Okay, and then, tell the jury why you left, I guess.
So my background through my academics was all research-based, looking.
And so you mentioned the American Federation of Firearms Tool Mark Examiner, AFT, right?
FTE, yes.
Okay, are you active with the FT?
Yes. So I am a distinguished member with AFTE. I'm also certified them in firearm and tool mark identification, and I'm serve on the board of directors as well. And among other duties that I have, I'm also an assistant editor with our scientific journal.
Okay, so is your association with AFT something that takes a lot of your time because you're on the board?
It does. In fact, I leave next week to go to a board meeting for that.
Okay, and then, in terms of outside work with other law enforcement agencies, tell the jury what you're doing and what you have done in the recent past that's relevant to this case.
So I have testified for both the state and the defense around the U.S. on.
Okay, do you also do training in the area of firearms identification?
Yes, I do. So I both take continuing education training, so I've received training over the years from the alphabet soup of government agencies, and then I also provide training to other law enforcement agencies. When I was in graduate school, I participated with Vanderbilt Center for Teaching in a mentorship program where I mentored undergraduates and taught them research design and, how to properly perform scientific research. And that kind of carried over again, just like their CRCH aspect. The mentoring aspect really inspires me, and that's something that I enjoy doing, so I'm contracted to train other crime laboratories, both in all these different areas that I'm talking about, putting on workshops that I'm an expert in, as well as training new examiners. So when they hire new people to come in, again going back to that concept of our focus when you're at the crime laboratory, is usually getting cases out the door. They don't have time to take individuals off of that casework to have them train the new people, so a lot of times they will hire and outsource contractors like myself, and then I will basically, during that across the 2-year period, train their examiners and get them competent in doing the same type of work.
Are you doing that for other countries at this moment?
Yes, I am.
What country are you working on right now?
So I just arrived back from Morocco a couple of weeks ago, where we have a strategic relationship with them through our military and the State Department, and so I was abroad. They had 5 new firearms examiners to help get them trained and also prepare them for their assessment so that they can be accredited.
May I approach, Judge?
You may.
I'm slightly unprepared here. I'll hand you NNN, Exhibit NNN, let you take a look at that. Let me know when you looked at that.
Okay, I've looked at that.
What is it?
That appears to be a 6-page true and accurate copy of my CV.
Okay, alright, your resume, right?
A fancy word for resume, yes.
I'm going to move to admit NNN, and I'm going to ask to publish, assuming it's admitted later. I thought I had copies of this. Defendant's Exhibit NNN offered.
Just one moment. No objection.
All right. Without objection, NNN is admitted. Defendants.
May I continue?
You may.
Dr. Warren, I used the phrase critical community in the past in talking with you. Do you recognize that phrase?
Yes, I do.
Okay, tell the jury. Let me ask you this simply. Is there a critical community, so to speak, in your industry as it relates to the legitimacy of firearms identification?
Yes, there is. So the critical community, as we've discussed, is generally professionals that aren't necessarily firearm and tool mark examiners, but are in some type of related or adjacent field. So that could be engineering, mechanical engineering, it could be psychology or human factors, these types of things. And there are individuals, again professionals in those areas, that have certain opinions that are critical of the firearm examiner and our ability as a professional to do what we claim we can do.
Okay, and is that something you've been dealing with throughout your time in this industry?
Yes, it is. And in fact, I have testified on a couple of occasions in hearings defending the science and defending our processes and procedures for what firearms and tool mark examiners can do against those individuals.
Alright, do you know what PAST is?
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
What that organization is?
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Okay, and then AS, is that right? Or then SA?
Then AS, the National Academies of Science, yes.
Are those 2 organizations that have been critical of the firearms identification business at times?
So they are 2 groups or organizations that they will contract a number of professionals in the legal field and the statistics field. Again,
What's PAST stand for?
SOAPCAST is the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology.
Okay, and is that like the President of the United States that we're talking about?
Yes, it is. It came out in 2016 and was for President Obama at the time.
In your time as an AFD board member, have you found that this critical community to actually be helpful in advancing the firearms industry?
Yes. So whenever you have a constructive dialogue play out and you can discuss these things, it's essentially what's called peer review. So you have a situation where experts have a scientific discussion, they can bring, different perspectives into play, and to be able to discuss those opinions on both sides, and it generally will push any scientific endeavor, BUT in this case specifically forensics and firearm and tool mark identification forward as a field, because we are able to take those critiques that are being leveraged and design research to address those types of questions to essentially improve our field and to prove that we can do what we say we do.
Did I, in the course of this case, ask you to review some materials specifically regarding this matter?
Yes, you did.
And just tell the jury, to the best of your recollection, what it is that you would have reviewed.
So I was basically asked to review the examiner for the State Crime Lab, so ISP, that was Ms. Oberg, to review her work product, to review her conclusions that were expressed in her report, and to determine if the documentation and essentially to evaluate whether the basis for her opinion was properly and sufficiently documented. And so, accomplished that, I needed to review her case file, and I actually had 3 different reports and associated case files that I reviewed for this case, as well as the microphotographs, so photographs that were taken on the microscope, where she was comparing 2 different items together at the same time. It included other types of supporting documentation, such as I reviewed a transcript from a deposition that she gave earlier this year.
Okay, and was the information that you received from me, in your opinion, was that adequate enough, or was it enough information to generate some opinions?
Yes. Everything that I asked for to be able to review, I was provided.
Okay, is there anything that you didn't get that you would normally suspect to be present in a case like this?
No, nothing that comes to mind right now.
Okay, and you mentioned that. Judge, may I approach up here to grab a couple exhibits?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Dr. Warren, you mentioned that you reviewed some photographs, the microphotographs or microscopic. Is that fair?
Yes, microphotographs or microscopic photographs, either would be fine.
And are those the things that you would normally see in a case file in a situation like this?
Yes, they would be.
Okay, tell the jury, from a procedural standpoint, what the significance of is or the purpose for those photographs when you do these, when you, as a firearm examiner, when you engage in this process.
Sure. So photographs are one aspect of documentation. Documentation is very important for multiple reasons. First of all, the examiner, it may be years between when I work the evidence or when an examiner works the evidence and when the case goes to trial if it does. And so the first aspect of documentation is to refresh my recollection when I'm told, hey, this is going to trial, you need to be at such and such location on a particular date. Another aspect of it is for laboratory accreditation. So there are requirements for the work process and product to be properly documented such that another qualified examiner could review your documentation and understand and be able to determine why you reached the conclusions that you reached. And then, I would say probably the most important part is to be able to illustrate to other people, such as yourselves, specifically what was observed. So just like on a math test where you have to show your work, you can't just put down an answer and say, trust me, I got this the correct way. You have to show what you did and what your process was and what you actually observed on the microscope that led you to form those particular conclusions.
There was some testimony in the courtroom earlier about this is like a movie when you view it. Are you generally familiar with that concept in your business?
Yes. So generally, the way I hear it is people say the photograph is a 2D representation of what I saw in 3 dimensions. That's not correct. Actually, calling it a movie is slightly more correct. A microscope generally has a very narrow depth of field, which means you're getting a projection from the light of a very, very thin slice of whatever is in focus underneath the microscope. And so as an examiner is looking at it, they are constantly seeing that 2-dimensional image being projected into their eyes. And so in a movie situation, you can move the bullet or the cartridge case under the microscope and see multiple surfaces, multiple areas of focus throughout the course of your examination. But generally, so documentation through photography has been very, very well accepted within our field since the 19th century. The importance of it has been recognized not only to, again, show your work and refresh my recollection of what I observed at that time, let's say 2 years ago, but also to be able to show others, hey, here's the PR oof, this is what I did, this is what I observed, and these are the reasons that back up my conclusion. All the standard textbooks that we read when we're in training from the 1920s, 30s, all the way to the 60s, all of them talk about the importance of photography and documentation for this very reason. So I would not want to discount it and say, oh, it's just a movie. I basically have all the time that I need when I'm examining evidence to get the lighting just right, the angles just right, the focus just right to take the best photograph that is representative of what I observed at the time that I did that examination.
Thank you for that. Are you familiar with the phrase subclass?
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Okay, just briefly, in layman's terms, tell the jury. Well, let me ask you.
Yes, it is very important.
Okay, tell the jury what that means, just because it's been some time since we heard this.
Okay.
Excuse me, Your Honor, I don't know what that is.
Okay, what subclass means?
Thank you.
Because it's been some time. Thank you.
So briefly, before I get into subclass, there's essentially 3 types of characteristics that examiners look at. So if you think about kind of an inverted pyramid, the top, or your food pyramid, so you've got the top, the big level, this is class characteristics. Class characteristics are going to be features that are common to multiple different firearms. Just like for vehicles, if I said an SUV, that's a class characteristic. There are going to be lots of different make/model SUVs. It doesn't really give you a specific idea of something in particular, it gives you a general idea of what you're looking for. It may help you narrow down the pool of possibilities. On the very, very tip of that pyramid, you have what are called individuals characteristics. These are fine, microscopic scratches, we call them striations, that are generally found to be individual or unique to a specific firearm. In between there, you have what are called subclass characteristics, so these are features that are generally more gross, and when I say gross, I mean larger than the individual characteristics, and they help you reduce the pool of possibilities more than class characteristics, but they can't point you to a specific.
Speaking of, you prompted my memory. Did I show you a copy of a 5-minute video of a Sig Sauer plant where the
Yes.
guns were being manufactured?
Yes, I saw 2 videos to that extent.
In watching that, what's the relevance of that video, if any, to this particular examination and the circumstances in this case?
So I didn't see in why relevance between either of the videos, neither discussed the specific tooling for the tools or the tool marks that were left on the cartridge in this particular case.
Okay, in fact, was there a spot in one of the videos where they said, hey, we can't talk about the details? Do you recall that?
Yes. So the videos were focused on the two major components that were manufactured, the slide, the upper part of the firearm, and the frame, the part that has the grip and the serial number. Whenever it go to the details for the internal components, which would be things like the extractor and the ejector that would be pertinent to this case, those items were not mentioned.
Okay, because are these trade secrets and all that kind of stuff, right?
That's one reason, yes.
Okay, have there been recent circumstances where laboratories have been shut down because of this inability to distinguish between subclass and individual characteristics?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, tell the jury when the last time you were aware of that happening in this country.
Most recently, the Rhode Island State Crime Laboratory had to suspend its firearm and toolmark operations, in part because of some issues with recognizing subclass, and then just before that, just a couple of months before that, the Wyoming State Crime Lab also had to suspend its operations.
When was the Rhode Island one generally, if you know?
I want to say it was maybe so it first hit the news maybe a month and a half ago, but it happened, I want to say 2 or 3 months ago.
Okay, so this is all very recent?
Yes, it is.
Okay, let's talk about cycled rounds versus fired rounds, okay?
Okay.
Are you familiar with the distinction and the significance of that in this?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and tell the jury, can you explain to them what your knowledge of that is, so that we're all on the same page?
So when we talk about an unfired cartridge that has been cycled, that's specifically going to be in a semi-automatic firearm, so not a revolver. A semi-automatic firearm has multiple tools that, if it were to be fired, would extract the just fired cartridge case or brass out of the chamber and eject it so that the next live round can be automatically loaded, the trigger can be reset, pulled, and the whole process can repeat. If the firearm is not fired in one of those cartridges, so the live rounds is fed into the chamber, the operator does not need to pull the trigger and shoot the firearm. Instead, they can decide not to, and if you remove the magazine and pull the slide back, that extraction and ejection will still happen to clear the unfired round out of the gun to make it safe. The process of that may leave some of those toolma RKS from the action of the extractor and ejector on that cartridge, even though it has not been fired, and that would be separate from a cartridge case, which is the same brass piece but after it's been fired and that once live round has been disassembled through the firing process. And when a cartridge case has been fired, it's experiencing a lot higher pressure and forces in the interaction between the extractor and the ejector on that cartridge case, because you've essentially just had an explosive reaction happen inside of that firearm.
Okay, and so in this case specifically, are you generally familiar with item 16?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and do you know that item to be the unfired cartridge case, or cycled, unfired round that was collected at the scene of where the girls were found?
Yes, that is what I'm familiar with.
Alright, and are you familiar with several firearms that were collected in this case by the law enforcement and taken to the lab?
Yes, I am familiar that several firearms were collected and taken to the crime laboratory for processing and comparison.
Okay, and specifically, is one of those what is now numbered item 315, or at least it is in the reports, which is a Sig Sauer handgun?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and if I told you that that's the handgun that was taken from Mr. Allen's house, do you know that?
I do not know that. I was not there when it was collected, but that is my understanding is that the ISP item 315 was the firearm that was collected from Mr. Allen.
Okay.
Excuse me, Your Honor, I think he misspoke. 315, I assume it wasn't intentional. 314.
314, I'm sorry, that's fine, 314. Yeah, 315's the test fire. Sorry about that.
315 is not the test fires.
Geez, sorry Jim. It's one of the closet rounds, that's right. Sorry, thank you.
It's the
Winchester.
memory box round, yes, the Winchester.
May I continue?
You may.
Thanks for that clarification. So, well, I've lost my train of thought. Oh, getting back to this distinction between cycled and fired rounds, okay? Is it appropriate in the tool mark ident, the firearm identification business to examine a cycled round with a test-fired round? In other words, kind of comparing the two differences. Is that an appropriate process?
It is a process that is done. It really depends on what the question that is needed to be answered is. So generally, due to those differences in pressure of a fired versus an unfired cartridge, a fired cartridge case versus an unfired cartridge, you've got those differences in pressures. You've also got a difference in the amount of time with which those tools are in contact with that item. So generally, I would expect to see what I would say apples to apples, not apples to oranges. So if you're looking at mimicking the tool mark on an unfired cartridge, I would want to compare that to another unfired cycled cartridge. So there's been research, I want to say starting back in 2010, the University of Ames in Iowa started doing some research looking at the effect of the angle and the pressure of tool marks and the types of markings that they leave, and that research was continued in 2014 by NIST and NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and it's been performed by other people, even in the Netherlands, that even just a 15-degree difference in a tool can change the appearance of the tool mark. So if
in this case, Ms. Oberg was unable. Are you aware that she was unable to cycle a dummy round and create marks that were sufficient enough to compare to item 16?
So she did.
Objection, Your Honor. I don't believe that. I think he's misstated the evidence. That's not what she testified to.
Sustained.
She's testified she used both the test-fired and the cycled rounds and did acknowledge that the test fires were more prominent than the cycled rounds, but that she used both.
May I ask
Sustained. Yeah.
You reviewed her report, right?
I did review her report and her case files.
Did she use the cycled test round to draw her conclusions about item 16 and the gun?
No. So her notes indicate when she compared test fires from Mr. Allen's firearm to the cartridge in item 16 that it wasn't dummy rounds, but they were live rounds from the reference collection, that when those were hand cycled, the marks that were on them weren't prominent if they were reproduced at all. And so in order to effect a final conclusion, the majority of what was relied on for that opinion were the fired cartridge cases from that firearm.
Okay, and are you generally okay with that process? The idea that you're taking a fired cartridge case and extrapolating?
No. So the AFT generally accepted in our field and expressed in AFTE, as well as the ISP protocols, are that in order to form an identification you have to first prove that the tool marks are both repeatable and reproducible. We spoke of some of the other guns. There was one firearm in particular, I think it was item 101, where the discussion in the notes was very clear that the markings were both repeatable and reproducible across both the fired and the unfired cartridges. So I'm going to clarify both the fired cartridge cases and the unfired cartridges. In this particular case with item 314, that was not the case. So their reproducibility and their repeatability for that apples-to-apple comparison had not been established, so that would not be something I would rely on.
Are you familiar with the phrase error rates?
Yes, I am.
Okay, there's been some discussion about that in the courtroom, not today, but previously. Are there any error rate studies that are based on comparing a cycled, unfired round with a fired round?
No, there are not that I'm aware of.
Okay, let's get back to subclass and Ms. Oberg's findings, okay?
Okay.
Alright, tell the jury, what are the three tools here that are really in play in her examination?
So the three tool marks that are in play, to use your terms, are the extractor, the ejector, and what she calls the chamber face, I generally call the barrel hood.
Okay, and let's start with the ejector. What is your opinion about the possibility existence of subclass characteristics with the ejector?
So the ejector is...
Objection, Your Honor. If I may ask a preliminary question?
You may.
You indicated to the jury that you were familiar with item 16016, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You've never seen it before though, have you?
I have not seen any of the evidence in this case in person, no.
And therefore, you really can't answer the question that was posed to you, since you hadn't specifically seen or examined the evidence in question, correct?
No, that would be incorrect.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Can I ask a couple of foundational questions to educate the jury?
Sure.
First of all, did you review Ms. Oberg's case file, the 14-page report that has all the details in it?
Yes, I did.
And did you look at the photos of item 16?
I looked at the photos of item 16, that is correct.
The microscopic photos?
Both the macroscopic, taken with the regular point-and-shoot camera, as well as the microscopic photographs as well.
And in the course of your industry, your profession, is that adequate enough for you, in your opinion, to draw conclusions?
For the conclusions I am drawing in this case, yes.
Okay, so the question is with the ejector, the first tool, what was your opinion about the possible existence of subclass characteristics?
So Ms. Oberg, in her case file, documented the ejector quite well. She took photographs of the ejector directly, as well as of the ejector marks that were left on the unfired cartridges and the fired cartridge cases. When those were then compared to the cartridge in item 16, she also noted that the machining surface on the ejector had a high potential for subclass and, based on her photographs, I would agree with her. So again, if you go back to subclass characteristics, typically when an item is molded, it's stamped or it's CNC machined. CNC stands for computer numerically controlled. Essentially, it's a fancy way of saying you put it in a big box and a computer controls all the machining operations. These have the highest propensity for leaving subclass marks. So you think about that chip in the knife blade and you cannot.
And then with regard to the extractor mark, what did she document regarding the potential for subclass, and how well was that documented?
So there was no documentation of any evaluation for subclass in the extractor itself. Research, so there are probably in excess of 20 particles specifically relating to subclass on extractors, and the general consensus among these articles across different firearms, the types of machinings that occur on extractors lend themselves to subclass marks. But again, there was no documentation of this type of research, and certainly no.
And then, with regard to the barrel hood, same two questions. What did you find in terms of subclass documentation, and, well, let me ask you that.
So the barrel hood or chamber face, depending on which term you want to use, has even less research regarding it. Because that's not a typical tool mark that is used, it's actually a tool mark that I've never heard be used until this particular case. There's just not any research out there on it to determine specifically the types of machining operations that occur, whether there's a potential for subclass like there are for the more common tools that are usually relied on, like the extractor and the ejector or even the breech face and the firing pin impression.
So just to kind of try to maybe summarize, in your opinion, is there a potential for subclass characteristics with regard to all three of those tools in this case?
Yes, there is certainly the potential for subclass on all three tools.
So is it accurate to say, then, that you can't make any specific identifying characteristics because of the potential for subclass?
So.
Objection, Your Honor.
Is that, oh, I'm sorry.
Can
I rephrase my question?
I'm sorry?
Can I rephrase the question, then?
Sure.
I agree with you, we're talking so. Is it possible in your opinion, based on what you've seen from her work, to draw conclusions about individual characteristics in this case?
So no, you can't draw conclusions about individual characteristics unless you have done the appropriate research and determined what the differences are, so which markings are individual and which ones are subclass. Once you have done that, if there are individual characteristics, once the subclass characteristics have kind of been subtracted from the equation, then you could make a potential conclusion regarding that.
Okay, and was that done here?
Only for the ejector.
Okay, and so may I approach, Judge?
You may.
Let me hand you what's been marked previously as defendant's exhibit.
Yes,
Or that photograph.
So I reviewed specifically for this report and the associated case documentation. I believe there were 13 or 14 photographs that I reviewed and I recognize this as one of them.
Okay, and just tell the jury what that tool mark is that they're seeing, that triangular tool mark.
Yes, so the triangular tool mark would be the ejector mark. So if you were looking zoomed out, the primer of the cartridge would be down here, that circular part that the firing pin strikes.
May I, Your Honor, may I approach so I can see what?
Yes, you may.
He's talking about?
So the triangular portion would be the impression from that ejector as the cartridge is being drawn rearward under the pressure of pulling that slide back, or the force of that slide being pulled back. And the ejector is essentially a stationary pin, so as that slide is being drawn back, the cartridge case is being pulled rearward with the extractor, it strikes that stationary ejector, which causes it to pivot and come out of the gun. And so what you're looking at is the impression that is left as that cartridge is being pulled rearward and striking the ejector.
So just to orient the jury again, is this the hairline down the middle here?
Yes. So on a comparison microscope, we have what's called a dividing line, and that basically is what separates what is on the left portion of the microscope from what is on the right portion of the microscope. So generally, you'll see in photographs that whatever is being examined in that particular photograph will be lined up between the two sides, right at that dividing line.
All right. And so the right side of this line is labeled 314T1. Is that correct?
Yes. So what the labeling indicates is that on the right-hand side of that black prism line, we are looking at test fire 1 from item 314, and on the left-hand side, what you're looking at is item 16.
Okay. And so when I look at this, I'm seeing these lines that cross over the hairline that are in similar locations. Do you see those?
I do see those.
They're kind of lighter than nearest?
Yes.
Okay. Tell the jury what that is.
So what happens in these microphotographs, we use oblique lighting. So if this is the surface, the top surface of that cartridge, there is a light up here, not directly shining at it 90 degrees, but it's shining obliquely coming at it. So what you see with the Lee GHT areas, those are the mountains if you think of this surface as being a microscopic contour. The high areas show up as light white areas because the light is coming in and striking those. The valleys are the dark areas in between. And if you look closer, you can also see some finer stuff, some finer striations. They're just not quite as light because most of the light that is coming in is being obscured by this taller mountain peak, if you will. And so
even though these marks are very, very similar, these white marks, that could be from the same tool, same lot, it's subclass?
So the potential for subclass is certainly reminiscent with these. These are indicative of what I would expect to see for subclass. And it would be the other stuff in between, the other striations, that would potentially be the individual characteristics.
That was Mr. Razi?
Yes, Jim.
Are you going to be showing other items like that?
I'm not sure. I'm trying to finish up here. So with the crime labs that you talked about, like Rhode Island being recently shut down, is it accurate that they were having problems distinguishing between these grosser marks and the finer marks?
So the report that was generated in that particular evaluation.
Objection, Your Honor. I don't see how the Rhode Island event has anything to do with us here today. They brought it out. They've said it was a problem over subclass. Getting into the details of the Rhode Island event, which he was not a part of, is irrelevant for this case.
I think comparing Rhode Island's circumstance and our circumstance has a tendency to prove that these characteristics here that you see with the naked eye can be deceptive. And these are Ms. Oberg's photos.
Which the ISP lab has not been discredited, as the Rhode Island lab has, so I would sustain the objection on relevance.
Thank you. Strike that. Tell the jury what CMS is.
So CMS stands for consecutive matching stria or consecutive matching striations.
And what is the relevance of CMS in your field?
So we talked about the body of critical experts earlier. One of the critiques is that the standard currently, as it's written and accepted and practiced in the field, is that a particular examiner has to observe sufficient agreement of those INDI visual characteristics. CMS is an attempt, again, to answer those critics, to provide a threshold or a numerical objective value. So the research was first published in 1959 in California, and it has been continued to be expounded upon. Her landmark publication was in 1970, and it continues to be published in law books that are pertaining to the modern scientific evidence and what experts might testify to. And what that is it's a numerical criteria that says when you examine these types of striations, in order to obtain a conclusion or to reach a conclusion of identification, you have to have.
Your Honor, at this time I would object and ask leave to ask a preliminary question.
You may.
Dr. Warren, are you aware the Indiana State Police does not use CMS methodology?
Yes, I am aware of that. So see.
You are aware that most laboratories do not use firearms/tool mark laboratories do not use CMS?
So.
You're aware of that, are you not?
Can he answer the question first?
Well, it's a yes. Yes or no, is he aware?
So I am aware that there is a subset of crime laboratories that do not use this, but I need to clarify that CMS is not a different examination. The foundation of finding striations is the exact same. The difference in policy and methods.
Your Honor, that's not answering my question.
Answer the question, sir.
Mr. Dr. Warren, the question is, most laboratories, firearms/tool mark examination, do not use a CMS criteria, correct?
So again, as I just testified, I would say I know that some do not. I do not know that I could qualify it as most.
And you do not, do you?
No, sir, I do use CMS.
And when have you been trained on CMS?
I was invited by John Murdoch to California in the beginning. It was either the end of 2022 or the beginning of 2023. He invited me out to help him teach a course in California and be his guest out there.
I didn't see that on your CV, Dr. Warren.
Yes, sir. I believe that's under list of training.
I have no further questions at this time. Thank you.
Would counsel approach, please?
Sidebar conference conducted.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Inaudible needs a break.
We are almost. I'm almost done. I'm in the last 3 or 4 questions.
And I apologize, I forgot.
Apology accepted. Give me 5 minutes. I don't want to say I'm asking 3 questions and then I ask 4 and I'm getting.
All right. So 5 minutes, Inaudible.
You know, I am, pretty much.
Okay.
Sidebar conference concluded.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Now I'm trying to move on hastily. Is this CMS process, the subjective process, is that a process that?
Yes, so CMS is recognized by AFT. It is not addressed in the AFT theory of identification, and that's what I testified to earlier. The standard is just that there's sufficient agreement. CMS takes that one step further to try and set an objective criteria that, since 1959, has been established.
Okay, so it's kind of like a score sheet, right? It's supposed to take the subjectivity of all this out?
It is minimizing the subjectivity, that is correct.
All right. Has that been the biggest? One of the biggest critiques on this discipline is that one examiner can have a different opinion than the next, the subjectivity?
Yes, that is one of the major critiques.
And did you apply your own? Well, let me ask you this, strike that. In terms of working through the CMS process, what information do you have to do that effectively?
So with CMS, you generally take a photograph of what you see on the microscope and then, out next to it, you will tabulate individual striations that you observe to be in agreement and count that consecutiveness.
Okay, and are the photographs the biggest part of that process, making sure that you have adequate photographs?
Yes, that is a prerequisite for the method.
Okay, and in this particular case, did you apply the CMS standards to what you saw in Ms. Oberg's work?
Yes, sir, I did.
And what were your findings based on your experience and that CMS process?
So the extractor itself, I believe, had one run of 4, which does not meet that threshold. The barrel hood or chamber face, depending on the terminology, I did not find any consecutive runs. I found multiple runs of 1. And the ejector, if you ignore or subtract out the potential for subclass, again, I did not find any consecutiveness.
So would you, based on that objective score sheet, would you have drawn a conclusion that there was sufficient agreement or insufficient agreement?
No, so there would be insufficient agreement.
I don't have any further questions.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna take a quick break, give you an opportunity to get up and move around a little. While you're outside the courtroom, please keep your minds open. Please don't form any opinions or conclusions about anything. You may discuss the evidence, but please, only do that if all 15 of you are present in the jury room at the same time, and please don't deliberate. Gentlemen.
All rise.
Jury out at 11:08 a.m.
All right. Let's take 15 minutes, folks. Jody, you can go off the record.
Off record at 11:09 a.m. On record at 11:28 a.m.
All right. Mr. Luttrell, are you ready to conduct your...
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rossi indicated to me he had an omitted question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Judge. It's just really based on the question we got from a juror earlier. So I'm going to ask him when they come in and maybe kind of clean that up.
Okay, sure. All right. Gentlemen.
All rise.
Jury in at 11:31 a.m.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Mr. Rossi.
Thank you, Judge. Just a couple of omitted questions to address a jury question earlier. Dr. Warren, you recognize what a slide is on a handgun?
Yes, I do.
Okay, we're talking about the mechanism across the top of specifically the Sig Sauer that slides back and then ejects, and then the cartridge ejects, right?
Yes.
Because we're talking layperson's terms.
Yes.
What do the firearms manufacturers, I'm trying to think of the right word, do they pay particular attention to the amount of force that is necessary when they construct these guns, the force that's necessary to slide or rack that?
Yes, they do. So, that's one of the blueprint, if you will, characteristics that the manufacturers will have to work out before they even start manufacturing. So that force is generally dictated by the recoil spring, and so there would be calculations and measurements that would be for manufacturing that spring that would give us particular tension or require a particular force to rack that slide.
Okay, and so is there actually research focused on the integrity of that slide as it's used over time? In other words, how does that force change?
No, there's not any research. Generally with firearms is you break them in. The mating surfaces, they tend to become smoother and the spring over time can potentially get weaker, so it would lead to a slightly lowered force to rack the slide. But generally, there's not specific research for measuring or determining the amount of force to.
But is that a circumstance that you can observe by inspecting a firearm in terms of whether or not the veracity of that slide has changed over time?
So, you can look at the tool surfaces on the slide themselves. There have been studies called persistent studies that look at the change of the tool surfaces as the firearm is used and fired, but not of the force required to rack the slide.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you're actually looking at the metals in this case, and the change in those metal surfaces as the firearm is used over time?
Yes, correct. So there are several studies that will take a machine gun, for instance, because you can rapidly fire a whole lot of rounds and compare, test fire 1 to 10 to 100 to 1000 and generally the research.
Okay, and so is a Sig Sauer. How would you describe a Sig Sauer as a brand in terms of the quality of handgun they make?
So Sig Sauer is generally perceived as a high quality handgun. I would say it's in the, upper tier or at least in the higher of the mid-range firearms.
Okay, and would you expect the integrity of that slide in a gun like this, item 314, to maintain itself over lots and lots of use?
Yes. So the exception to that would be if there was some type of use or abuse or corrosion that wasn't present on the photographs that I observed that Ms. Oberg had taken, either the macroscopic or also the microscopic of the internal working components, the ejector and the barrel face/barrel hood specifically.
Pass the witness.
Mr. Luttrell.
Thank you. Dr. Warren, you have used the term or phrase of mechanical fingerprint to describe a tool mark that a firearm can leave on a bullet, a cartridge, or a cartridge case. Is that correct?
Yes, I have used that term previously.
And that's where you learned that term. You applied it at your experience with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
You have no written report in this case. Is that correct?
That is correct. I do not have a written report.
Why is that?
It just was not something that came up in this particular case.
You were just talking about the persistence of a firearm's leaving individual characteristics, and that's been very well documented, as you indicated, absent some type of damage or gross misuse of a firearm in the intervening times. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
In fact, those studies show that the first bullet fired by a gun can be compared with the 10,000th bullet fired satisfactorily. Is that correct?
Yes, that there are tests that have shown it, up to probably 10,000 or even 20,000.
And you would absolutely expect a decently maintained semi-auto pistol, a SIG for example, its individual tool marks to persist over a period of 5 years, even if it had been frequently used?
Yes, I would, and that's actually a great distinction. These persistent studies are specifically for individual characteristics that we would be looking at.
Let's look at subclass characteristics. Is that a new concern in the field of firearm examination?
No, sir, it is not.
It's been studied for over 90 years, correct?
Maybe 90 years, yeah. So originally they were known as FA melee characteristics, I'll say in the early days. I don't know that it's been 90, but it's probably been close to that.
So the subclass or family characteristics is a way of breaking down or getting to the small part of that upside-down triangle, correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
At the top of the triangle, we have all firearms, and then we have class characteristics that can eliminate a number of firearms, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
What would be a class characteristic in this case?
So a class characteristic in this case would actually, the main one will be the relationship of the extractor to the ejector. And so, if you think about looking at a clock face, you would normally describe it, so you describe it from the position of the operator, so it's almost like an inverse clock face, but the extractor would be in roughly a 3 o'clock position and the ejector is generally in the 7 to 8 o'clock position, so that relationship between the two and those orientations would be considered a class characteristic.
Sir, when we talk about subclass characteristics, we're talking about the manufacturing process, the same tool, with approximately the same state of wear, operating on the other tool, correct?
Yes, that is correct. So subclass, as you stated, is due to that type of damage on the blade is one example. It's the easiest example to discuss, and it can persist for 10, 100, 1,000 different firearms that were made by that same tool.
But the point is regarding firearms is different tools manufacture different.
It can. So with the advent of CNC machining that I mentioned earlier, a lot of times the same tools can work on multiple pieces of the firearm. So, for instance, that SIG video that we watched described the different CNC machines that have multiple axes and all the operations can be performed on those two major components using the exact same tools.
But we were talking about an ejector. A different machine makes that ejector than makes the extractor, correct?
I don't know if that is correct for the SIG. I would guess that, yes, that is correct. So sometimes these parts are stamped, so it'd potentially be the same machine, just a different die, but yes, my expectation would be that in this case, the extractor and the ejector were made by two different tool mechanisms.
And the chamber face, or you call it the barrel hood, that's made by a different machine, as well, is it not?
Again, so different from the extractor and the ejector, yes, but potentially the exact same as the slide and the frame.
And this firearm is assembled generally speaking. These firearms are assembled by an individual reaching into a bucket and pulling out an ejector or extractor and assembling it on the firearm, correct?
Yes, that is correct. So as the parts come off the line, the assembly or the manufacturing line, they are typically stored in some type of bin in the assembly station, and the individual that is doing the assembling is just reaching into a bin of that particular lot of tools that are made at that time to assemble the firearm.
But that lot may come from a whole different company, but
Yes, that is correct. So
Thank you, sir, I appreciate that. Once you are talking subclass, if we think of I'll use the word funnel instead of triangle. Once we're down to a funnel, we're way down towards the bottom of that funnel by the time we're distinguishing between subclass and individual characteristics. Isn't that correct?
No, I would not say that is correct in every case. It will depend on the manufacturing technique potentially. Could be anywhere. It's not a line AR continuum, we'll say. So it could fall anywhere between the top of the pyramid and the very bottom of the pyramid or funnel.
In fact, even sequential serial numbers on a firearm may vary in terms of their subclass characteristics, and may not share subclass characteristics. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that could be correct. Again, that's why the documentation of the evaluation of that subclass potential is so important.
You were a firearm examiner for TBI for once you finished your training, for 6 years, correct?
6 going on 7, yeah, somewhere in there.
You were 1 month beyond 6 years, isn't that right, sir?
No, I believe it was more than that. Maybe it was close, maybe 2 or 3 months over.
You said you started in August of 2009, with your training program? Is that what your CV says?
Yes, that's what my CV says, and that is correct.
And you left TBI in October of 17, correct?
Yes, that's correct also.
A trained, experienced firearm and tool mark examiner would always consider the potential for subclass, correct?
Yes, that is also correct.
And in the report that Ms. Oberg documents, she indicated she had concerns about subclass on the ejector and pursued that further, correct?
Yes, after SHE documented that her concern was present, she did do additional investigation into the ejector specifically.
And she did not articulate in her report any concern about the extractor or the chamber face for subclass characteristics. Is that correct?
Not entirely. So there's no documentation that it was even considered at all, so we don't know if she...
You didn't answer my question, Dr. Warren. I apologize for interrupting you, but would you answer my question? Did she?
Judge, can we please?
Did she articulate?
Allow Mr. Warren to answer the question?
Well, let him ask the question that he wants to ask and him answer.
Did she articulate any concern, Dr. Warren, about subclass characteristics on the extractor and the chamber face?
There was zero documentation of any evaluation, so there is no way to know if there was a concern regarding the presence of subclass on these other.
I'm gonna ask that question again, Dr. Warren. I would ask you answer my question. Did she document any concern she had for subclass markings on the extractor or the chamber face?
Objection. Asked and.
Yes or no?
Asked and answered.
It has not been asked or answered.
He said he's going to ask it again.
Not this one. Overruled.
Did she document any concerns, sir?
There was no documentation on any evaluation or any resulting concern.
Your Honor, he's not answering my question. He's giving a speech to the jury that he wants to give them. I'm asking the questions. I would like him to answer my question.
It's a yes or no question, sir.
Did she document any concerns she had for subclass C characteristics on the extractor or the chamber face?
As I've testified, there was no documentation of any concern or any evaluation.
Your Honor, I would ask him to directly answer my question.
Sir, it's a yes or no question. Yes or no?
And the answer is no.
Do you know how many years Ms. Oberg had as a firearm and tool mark?
I do not know how much time she has.
She had. Would you be surprised to know she had well over the amount of time you've had to be a firearm and tool mark examiner?
No, that would not surprise me. Time does not factor into it in my mind.
You, a good firearm and tool mark examiner, would conduct research all the time while they're doing their craft, their discipline. Is that correct?
No, it would depend on what was in front of them. So if it was something that was routine, I would not expect there to be additional research that was performed.
But they're always doing research as they're being tool mark examiner, correct?
I'm going to objection to speculation on what a good firearm examiner would do.
Sustained.
We have the board of AFT here, Your Honor. I think he can, a board member of AFT. I think he can answer well. Let me rephrase it and he can answer it.
Rephrase it, then.
Sir, does AFT encourage its membership to continue to do research as they're maturing and gathering knowledge on firearm and 2L mark examinations?
No, so AFTE does encourage research by its practitioners. It does not qualify that research should occur from one case to the next, and, in fact, I would disagree that happens.
They encourage them to research and gather knowledge, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Are you suggesting to this jury that Ms. Oberg, after examining the ejector and noting potential for subclass characteristics, forgot about subclass characteristics when she examined the extractor or the chamber face?
I'm saying that is possible, because nothing was documented regarding that process.
And do you always put all of your research and your knowledge that you'd gained in your 6 years at TBI into a report and document everything about your experience and training that's led to you to your opinion?
Yes. So in my 6 years with the TBI and in my 14 years total doing this, if I do research that is specific to my conclusions for a particular case, I make every effort to document all of that to the best of my ability.
So everything you rely upon in your examination, everything that you've learned over time, everything you've learned to distinguish subclass from individual characteristics, you actually attach that to your report?
No. As I testified just a second ago, anytime I have to do research for a specific case, something that directly relates to my opinion in that case, I do note it.
Ms. Oberg identified 3 different tools having made tool marks on this particular cartridge, item 016. Is that correct?
Yes, she did determine actually the 3 tool marks were what she based her opinion on.
And by basing her opinion on 3 separate tool marks, that strengthened her opinion that she ultimately came to, identifying the Dief and Dance Sig Sauer.
I don't believe that's...
I object to speculation about what was going on in her mind at the time she made these conclusions. I don't think he's in a position to testify about that.
I'll rephrase the question.
Okay.
The fact that she notes 3 different tools that she identified as marking, making specific, distinct tool marks on the cycled cartridge, strengthened the result that she obtained. Isn't that correct?
I don't believe that it strengthens the results. There was subclass agreement noted on the ejector. There was some agreement which does not meet the AFT sufficient agreement stated by her and her report on the extractor. And I didn't see any agreement on the barrel face, so to me, no, they do not strengthen the final conclusion.
Ms. Oberg found agreement on the chamber face markings and of the defendant's SIG and item 016 though, didn't she?
She does state that she found some agreement.
She found sufficient agreement, didn't she?
No, so her case file says some agreement.
The
report does indicate at the bottom, there's a stipulation that says when she reaches an identification that is sufficient agreement, but that is not reflected in the notes portion, where she was showing her work and illustrating that basis.
The bottom line on the question, the bottom line is a tool mark when you're talking about cycled only versus fired cartridges. Isn't that correct?
No, that's not correct.
The task of the examiner is to look at the fired test casing and see if it actually creates the similar markings that are on the question item 016. Isn't that correct?
Yes. As I testified earlier, it's their producibility and their repeatability of a particular tool mark of a particular tool that needs to be evaluated.
So it's not apples to oranges. She's actually confirming an examiner can confirm that the test fires are appropriate and adequate to compare to the cycled cartridge. Correct?
That is something that can be determined, but specifically in this case, she actually determined that it was not sufficient, that she could not find the agreement from the fired cartridge cases to the cycled cartridges.
In fact, she found that she could find that the test-fired cartridge was suitable for comparison to 016, correct?
So that was her conclusion, yes.
In fact, you just did that in front of the jury with Defense Exhibit O. Isn't that right?
You'll have to clarify what that is.
You documented for the jury that you could use that the ejector mark from the test fire was suitable for comparison to 016, the cartridge.
No, sir, I did not testify to suitability of anything. I simply looked at the photograph itself and pointed out what was visible on that photograph.
I asked you earlier if you actively use CMS, and you say you do actively use it.
Yes, sir, I do.
And in 2021, you testified in the 2 years ago, October of 2021, that you did not use CMS, correct?
So I'm not sure which case you're referring to, but if that was my testimony, it was probably that I didn't use it in that particular case. So with CMS, it is mostly only applicable to striated marks, not impress marks. So if there's, let's say, a firing pin impression, that would not be something that would be amenable to CMS. The way I teach it to police departments, crime laboratories in this country and in Morocco.
Your Honor, I think he's answered the question, so I appreciate his answer, but he's continuing to answer after he's answered my question, so I would object. Just one moment, Your Honor. Would you and you received training, you indicated, in 22 or 23 on the use of CMS?
Yes, sir, that's some of the most recent training where Mr. Murdoch invited me out, yes, sir.
And were you trained to use another examiner's photographs that WRE created to show one aspect of the firearm in your evaluation of CMS?
Yes, sir. During the training course itself, that's exactly what is used is the photographs that another examiner had taken.
And when you trained that you could go into court and testify on CMS based upon your examination of another examiner's photograph?
Yes, and in fact that's regularly occurs.
Are you the Dr. Warren who testified in the case in Flagstaff, Arizona, in 2021, October of 2021?
I have testified in Flagstaff, Arizona. I will have to take your word if you say it's 2021. I don't recall.
And did you indicate, in an interview in that case, that you do not use CMS methodology?
I don't recall an interview associated with that case, but again, it might have been a situation where it wasn't applicable or, yeah, I didn't use it in that case if it specifically was asked whether I used it in that specific case, but I don't recall.
Do you recall telling in that matter, telling them that it's a West Coasty thing, it's not something that you do or that's done in the Midwest or the East Coast?
Yes, that's certainly true. So CMS was started in 1959 at UC Berkeley, and so that is generally where you find the majority of practitioners. It has migrated, across the US, but as I stated earlier, there are some laboratories that do not use it.
Have you testified in the past that you cannot come into court and offer a conclusion based upon photographs alone?
I'm gonna object. That's asked and answered.
Overruled.
Thank you.
Have you said that?
Can you repeat the phrase that you used?
Have you testified in court that you cannot render a conclusion on a result?
Yes, I can image there are situations where the photographs are such that I could not testify to any specific conclusions.
And did you say, because you need to look at the exhibits yourself on the microscope and look at it all different phases and possibilities, you would not make a conclusion off of a handful of photographs? Were those your words?
Again, I don't recall the specifics of that. I could certainly imagine that I think in the Flagstaff case. Those bullets were very soft lead bullets fired through a micro-groove barrel, which means they're teeny tiny marks, so it is possible and that I would say along those lines that yes, in that particular case there'd be so many different phases and possible combinations and things would be so microscopic that I would need to physically examine the evidence in order to render a conclusion on a source opinion.
You did not say that. In this particular case, I could not. You just said as a general rule you could not render an opinion based upon a handful of photographs. Aren't those your words under oath?
Again, that may be my exact wording, I'm not sure. I can only say that my recollection right now is with that case in those specific situations, yes, that would be a correct statement is that I could not or would not even look at the photographs and make a source conclusion determination from the photographs.
What's the most important? Well, let me withdraw that and ask you what's the most time you have your own laboratory, correct?
Yes, I do.
And it's not an accredited laboratory?
No, we are not accredited.
But you have testified you have tried to make it up to the standards that would be required by accreditation?
Yes, I would say that we meet the standards of accreditation.
Of course, the whole concept of accreditation is you not making that decision, an outside party affirming that. Isn't that the whole point of accreditation?
No. The way I understand accreditation is essential LY. You are paying a peer of yours to come into your laboratory and look at your procedures and then look at, let's say, 5 cherry-picked cases and make sure that those specific cases that were presented to your peer accurately reflect that you are doing what your policies say.
So it sounds like you don't have a lot of confidence in accreditation.
I do not have a lot of confidence in accreditation. That, in certain circumstances, would be fair. And as an example, the Rhode Island and the Wyoming crime labs are both accredited.
What's the most important tool in your laboratory, sir?
You'll have to be more specific. I have many tools that are very important for specific tasks.
What's the very most important everyday tool you use in firearms/tool mark examination?
In firearm and tool mark examination, the most important tool would be myself.
How valuable to you is your comparison microscope when you do examinations?
So if you are conducting microscopic examinations, then you would need to have a comparison microscope in order to accomplish that.
How crucial and essential is that if you're going to make an examination, to use your comparison microscope?
If you're going to do a comparison of the physical items of evidence, then you would need to use the comparison microscope to do that.
And why is the comparison microscope so central to firearms/tool mark examination?
Judge, I'm gonna object at this point to relevance. He's just asking broad-based questions that have nothing to do with this case.
Oh, it has everything to do with this case, Your Honor, I disagree.
Overruled.
Why is your comparison microscope so critical to your examination of the evidence?
Again, my comparison microscope is one tool that I have. It is one that is necessary according to our accepted practices in order to do a comparison, and because that's an accepted tool, that's something that is necessary to do the job. I don't know what else I can say about that.
So you could either use it or not use it when you do an examination comparing test fires to an unknown piece of evidence?
Yes, sir, you can use that tool or you can use another tool like a 3D microscope or, there are multiple different tools that could be used.
You were trained on the AFT Standards Training Manual?
So I was trained using the TBI training manual, but it was based on the AFT training manual.
And despite the questions Mr. Razi asked you about critics of firearms and tool marks, you strongly endorse the AFT manual and its methodology, correct?
So for firearms examiners, I strongly recommend AFTE membership and participation. I don't have a specific strong recommended or whatever your term was for how an agency uses that particular training notebook. They are provided to AFTE members as guidelines and as some type of starting point for the agency to take it and make it their own.
So it sounds like the comparison microscope. You can take it or leave it. Is that what you're telling us today?
If you want to look at it that way, sure.
The role of a forensic scientist is to let the evidence speak for itself. Is that correct?
Yes,
Judge, I'll object again to relevance. We're talking very broadly here.
Sustained.
You have used that term yourself in talking about your role in firearms/toolmark examination, that you let the evidence speak for itself. Isn't that correct?
Same objection.
Overruled.
Is that correct, sir?
Yes, so those are statements that sound familiar, like something that I...
And is that something you would take it or leave it, or is that something you firmly believe in?
No, I would firmly believe that as a forensic scientist, or even outside of forensics as a scientist, I document the evidence to the best of my ability and then demonstrate that evidence and let it speak.
You offer services to individuals or institutions that wish to hire you that you can do consulting, like you've done in this case, correct?
Yes, sir. So I have a website and an email address and a phone number published. I'm equally available to whoever needs those consulting services.
And you part of that consulting is in reviewing documents and giving your opinion about those documents, that documentation, isn't that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So I...
And thank you, sir.
Routinely review.
You've answered my question. I appreciate that. And you also do your own examination on evidence in cases, isn't that correct?
If that is something that...
Yes or no, sir?
Is requested, then yes, that is something that I'm capable of doing.
So when you were asked by Mr. Razi if you had received everything you needed in this matter, that did not include item 016 or the various firearms in this matter, including the defendant's firearm. You didn't ask for those, did you?
I don't remember what the discussion with the attorney was regarding that. Again, to dealing with the request to review the documentation, I...
Not only your website, sir, but you yourself expressed to the defense that you could actually test these specific items, correct?
Again, I do believe that was a discussion that occurred in...
Thank you, Mr. Warren.
This particular case, but I couldn't say for certain.
You believe that you did?
Yes, sir, I do believe I did.
And you know that whole process, how an order is sent to the court to obtain the evidence from the Indiana State Police and it's appropriately shipped to you in your laboratory, where you can examine under your comparison microscope, should you choose to do so, this evidence and test fires that you yourself would take, correct?
I'm not familiar specifically with the process in this state, but generally what was just described is the MOST common occurrence whenever I do physically examine evidence.
And did you ask the attorneys for that opportunity?
Again, I don't remember. This was over a year ago where these discussions probably would have occurred. I do make it a routine to explain all the services that I can offer. Physical examination of the evidence using a comparison microscope is one of those options.
Regarding that, if you have received these items to compare the defendant's firearm with 016, create your own test fires and test cycle and compare them to 016, would you have decided to use your comparison?
I'm going to object at this point. This calls for speculation.
Overruled.
Would you use your comparison microscope if you had been asked to do that and actually had the items?
If I was asked to perform a physical comparison of items, then yes, that would entail a comparison microscope.
You wouldn't have a take it or leave it approach to the comparison microscope in that situation, would you?
Again, it would depend on what the request was. If it was to examine physical items of evidence together, then I would expect to utilize the comparison microscope.
This is the defendant's exhibit O. That's a static photograph, correct?
Yes, that photographs are static.
And if you are looking at this image on a comparison microscope, any slight adjustment or movement could change all the lighting that you testified to the jury about, correct?
No, sir. So the surface does not change just because you move something back and forth. So you might illuminate things slightly differently, but things that are there are not just going to not become there anymore.
But the photograph could look entirely differently if you adjust the image or the lighting, correct?
It is possible that the photograph could look different if you adjust the lighting or the position. That is correct.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Razi.
Yeah, thank you, Judge. Dr. Warren, how long ago would you estimate it was that we first started working together?
It was over a year ago, I would say. So based on my case number in this case, it would have been before September of last year, so more than a year ago.
Okay, and did I ask you to generate any reports?
I do not recall that request, no.
Okay, did you make yourself available to the state of Indiana when they wanted to depose you?
Yes, I did.
And approximately when was that?
It would have been, so I was in Morocco at the time, so maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Nothing further.
I have no questions.
Does anybody on the jury have any questions for Dr. Warren? All right. Would counsel approach?
Sidebar conference conducted.
Okay. Tons of notes. You stated the change of position, and a slight turn of the tools in a handgun can change the marks on A.
I don't care.
Sure.
Would removing, disassembling, cleaning, etc., change the position of individual L striations, and if so, would you have to test a cartridge in all iterations to consider it objective and or relevant?
Sure.
I don't know the answer to that.
Are you okay with the question?
I'm okay with it.
Do you know if the manufacturer keeps track of subclass characteristics?
That's fair.
If he knows.
Would the presence of subclass characteristics only be something to acknowledge in pursuit of individual characteristics?
I think the answer is clearly yes, but I think it's confusing.
I have no idea, half the time, what I'm reading. Is there a reason you didn't verify the results in the report by conducting your own analysis, rather than reviewing the pictures and findings of Ms. Oberg?
No objection.
I think that's fine.
Would doing your own analysis have been more conclusive?
Fair.
Do you believe that using 2 runs of 3, or 1 run of 6 would be the gold standard to observe sufficient analysis, and would you have done this to come to any conclusions about the items?
Kind of loaded.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
It's somewhat consistent with the testimony, I guess.
Inaudible, it's fine.
Okay. Would individual marks be lighter or darker depending who is manually cycling the cartridge due to the force? They tried to get into that a little.
Yeah, I'm not going to object.
Do you look at the subclassification marks on the cartridge?
Yes.
Yes.
What is the relevance of the cartridges having similar subclass characteristics?
Oh, geez, they must not have been here for the last.
Inaudible.
Inaudible.
Okay.
Oberg was inaudible.
Are sequential serial numbers to guns made within?
I don't think he really talked about
You didn't.
serial numbers though, did we?
He didn't. You didn't really.
I asked him a question about the machines.
Yeah, the tooling.
Okay. So no.
That just goes to the inaudible in the frame.
Yeah.
The video talked about it.
So yes.
Sure, ask it. I don't care.
This one's real weedy. Can you speak to the 1.5% false positive and 2.8 false negative percentages in consecutively made tools?
Sure.
Inaudible.
It's not. That's not really. Actually, that question is just entirely wrong. It's conflating two totally separate issues.
I thought we were into separate.
He talked about error rates, but not
Not in this.
in the course of making tools.
Okay. So no on this one. Okay. Thank you. That was my memory as well. Ms. Oberg cycled numerous dummy cartridges through Mr. Allen's gun with the same characteristics/markings. Are you saying these are false findings?
She didn't do any dummy.
Negative response.
Plus, it's not a true statement, so
Okay. So no on that.
that tells us she doesn't know what's going on.
Are you a certified firearm and tool mark examiner?
Yeah.
Have you completed proficiency testing and black box studies? Oh, nice. Somebody was paying attention.
Paying attention, yeah?
So okay on that one.
I'm okay with that one. I don't know that those things are really mutually exclusive. Proficiency testing and black box studies are not.
So no.
They're not related.
He could answer it.
I don't think
It's kind of mixing the two.
Okay, so no on that. Inaudible, are you aware that the ejector from Mr. Allen's firearm had a recessed portion which caused?
that's pretty intuitive.
I'm sorry?
Are you aware that the ejector from Mr. Allen's firearm had a recessed portion which caused individual characteristics on the cartridges, similar to the cartridge found? I'll strike the dummy cartridges. Okay. Is it normal? Oh my god, they won't stop. Are you aware that Ms. Oberg's findings were verified by a separate party, and this party or identifier agreed?
That's fine.
She testified about that.
She did.
About going through the verification.
Verified by a second party. Is it normal practice for you to not issue a report when conducting examinations or consultations?
Well, he didn't do an examination.
Well, it said when conducting examinations or consultations, as you did for this case. If not, please elaborate why a report was not included in this case.
Why what?
Why a report was not. So both of those are okay.
Yeah, I think they're fine.
And what are the chances that the cartridge found at the scene would have the same subclass markings as the Indiana State crime? Eric Warren lab test round.
That's very intuitive.
Wow. Okay. And then, we break for lunch.
Okay.
Sidebar conference concluded.
Okay. Lots of questions.
Yes.
Okay. You stated that the change of position and slight turns of the tools in a handgun can change the marks on a cartridge. How would CMS or objective testing be usable?
So the CMS or the standard pattern matching would still apply the same way. The question would just become, does it meet that examiner's sufficient threshold or does it meet that CMS threshold? And what the study showed is, like I said, with just a minimum of 15 degrees the surface contour would change enough that it no longer met that threshold.
Okay. Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell.
No questions.
Okay. Would removing, disassembling, cleaning, etc. change the position of individual striations, and if so, would you have to test a cartridge in all iterations to be considered objective and or relevant?
No. So just cleaning or disassembling and reassembling the firearm would. Eric Warren not change the individual characteristics unless some damage had occurred. So if you take the gun apart and say dropped a piece onto the asphalt or something rough, there's the potential that that could change. If that occurred, you would have to do testing. Hopefully, you'd have the testing from before the disassembly occurred, and then you'd also have to test after their assembly occurred to determine if that damage actually did affect the individual characteristics or not.
Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell.
Briefly, Your Honor. Eric Warren. As it relates to the extractor in this case, there was no photograph of the extractor, correct?
That is correct. There was no direct photograph of the extractor. I mean, the extractor is visible in some of the macroscopic photos of the whole firearm, but to actually see the tool working surface, there was not a photograph.
You'd have to disassemble the firearm, correct?
Yes, you would.
And that could lead to problems if there ever was another examiner deciding to test that firearm after you disassembled it, correct?
No, sir. So again, as only if it had been dropped and damaged. But prior to that point, you would have tests made before it was then disassembled and evaluated.
I have no further questions. Eric Warren. Eric Warren.
Do you know if the manufacturer keeps track of subclass characteristics?
No, manufacturers don't keep track of that kind of thing. It's all microscopic that pertains to what we do, not so much to what they do.
Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell.
No.
Is there a reason you didn't verify the results in the report by conducting your own analysis, rather than reviewing the pictures and findings of Ms. Oberg?
So in that particular case, that's what I was testifying to earlier. That was a discussion that, For whatever reason, we decided it was requested of me to evaluate the documentation to see if there was even sufficient documentation to support a particular conclusion that was reached. So my role, as I saw it and was discussed, is to both educate the attorney on what the conclusion was and then to explain if the documentation supported that conclusion or not.
Mr. Rossi. Eric Warren.
I mean, is that something you do on a pretty routine basis in your line of work?
Yes, this is a pretty common process.
Okay, nothing further.
Mr. Luttrell. Eric Warren. Eric Warren.
You made it clear you could do an examination and the defense did not ask you to do so, correct?
Yes, I would say that was not a request that was made that I recall. That is something that I could do if it were requested, I guess.
Anything else, Mr. Luttrell?
No. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Thank you.
No. Eric Warren.
Would doing your own analysis have been more conclusive?
So it's hard to say without actually doing analysis. There's the potential that I could have said, hey, I agree with her. There's also the potential that I could have gone the exact opposite way and say, there's absolutely no way this could have happened. So my opinion as it stands is that the documentation does not support a conclusion of same source, but for me to actually give that opinion of same source or a different source, that could be changed by the examination of the physical evidence.
Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell.
No, Your Honor.
Do you believe that using 2 runs of 3 or 1 run of 6 would be the Eric Warren gold standard to observe sufficient analysis, and would you have done this to come to any conclusions about the items?
So CMS that you have the option of either or. So as in terms of which one's the gold standard, they're equal on equal footing, either at least 2 runs of 3 or 1 run of 6. And I'm sorry, I don't know if that answered the full question. I feel like there was more, but...
Go ahead, Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell.
No, Your Honor.
Are you a certified firearm and tool mark examiner?
Yes, I am.
Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell. Eric Warren.
Certified by whom, sir?
Certified by the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners, or AFT. They're the only ones in the world that offer that certification.
Thank you. No further questions. Eric Warren.
Would individual marks be lighter or darker depending who is manually cycling a cartridge due to the force? Eric Warren.
So manual cycling can change both the force and the angle because of the force that is involved in the marking. That's why I menti-1'd the apples or oranges comparison earlier.
Okay. Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell. Follow-up examinations of Dr. Eric Warren.
The greater the force used in the manipulating the slide can make more pronounced prominent, marks on the cartridge, correct?
For the extractor, probably not. It would be more of the speed of which it was done. But for the ejector, because it is more impressed, that is certainly true, it could become more pronounced.
Thank you. Eric Warren.
Do you look?
I'm
sorry, what?
Did I?
You passed. I asked you.
Did I pass? I didn't.
Yeah. I asked you and you said no, and I looked at Mr. Luttrell.
Okay, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. Eric Warren.
Did you look at the subclassification marks of the cartridge?
So the cartridge itself, it is possible for an unfired round to have subclass markings from the manufacturing tools. Actually, in fact, there was a 2016 article that specifically looked at Winchester manufactured ammunition. The photograph that was taken of the extractor rim, I can't determine from the photograph if that is that type of subclass manufacturing mark or if it could potentially actually be from an extractor, because the tool that is used in that manufacturing process to create the tapered cartridge case is almost the same process as an extractor mark would be.
Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell. Eric Warren.
You'd have to look at it under a comparison microscope, wouldn't you?
No. So it could be better documented through photographs and I could evaluate it or I could evaluate it using a comparison microscope. Either would be sufficient.
Which would be the best?
Again, it depends on how good the documentation is. If there's good documentation, then I would say they're on equal footing. If there's not, then a comparison microscope would be better if I were going to be opining as to whether or not what the source tool was.
So a photograph is just as good as the comparison microscope?
Can be. Eric Warren.
Thank you. Eric Warren.
What is the relevance of cartridges having similar subclass characteristics?
Can you read that again? I'm sorry.
What is the relevance of cartridges having similar subclass characteristics?
So it would depend if we're talking about subclass from cycling or from tools inside of a gun that were cycled or ones that were manufacturing marks. So manufacturing mark subclass would just mean that the live round would have been manufactured in a close timeline with that same tool in the same state of wear as another cartridge, unfired round. If we're talking about the subclass on the firearm, again it just indicates you're restricting or you're funneling or pyramiding the potential firearms and reducing the pool that could have left those marks.
Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell.
No, Your Honor.
Are sequential serial numbers of guns made within the same lot, assuming that there isn't a change in lot numbers?
So you can't associate a serial number with a specific lot because they do get dumped into the bins like we talked about, and there could be multiple lines of manufacturing running at the same time. It is generally. Eric Warren accepted that a close in serial number will indicate that the specific parts inside of those were manufactured within some close time frame, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they were consecutively made or even made on the same line.
Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell.
No questions.
Are you aware that Ms. Oberg's findings were verified by a second party, and this party, or identifier, agreed with hers?
Yes, I'm aware of that. It was yes. We'll leave it at that.
Mr. Rossi. Eric Warren.
Is the Are there many different types of verification processes?
Yes, there are. So verification can be done non-blinded, where there's essentially a dialogue between the two individuals and that's the least desirable. It's the one that gives rise to the most bias. Then there is a semi-blind type level where there may be minimal communication or maybe policy only dictates that verifications happen in very specific scenarios so that the verifier can already assume what the conclusions were based on how it's done. And that was partly how it took place in this case. And then, of course, there's fully blind where all markings are removed that the examiner might have put to IndiCAD where they were looking, all the items are kind of put in one big batch so that they're not previously grouped so that you give the verifier no context clues, if you will, of Eric Warren what that initial examiner's opinion might have been.
Mr. Rossi. Eric Warren.
Does the verification process involve the verifier looking at the case file, kind of like the report of the original examiner, and saying, hey, you need to add some more information here, or are you? Is that part of that process or not?
Can be part of the process.
Okay, I have nothing further.
Mr. Luttrell. Eric Warren.
Well, you know, in fact, that this was a verification that took place without the verifier knowing the conclusion that the examiner had reached at the time he's doing the verification, correct? You know that.
I don't know that. I believe there was some testimony in a deposition, but there was no direct conversation with the verifier that the results were made known to them, but there was no discussion regarding whether they were grouped together or not, whether those marks were taken off or not, and the policy that I south in place in the lab system at the time was all identifications must be verified, eliminations based on individual characteristics must be verified, but everything else was examiner discretion. So there's also context clues that if you're being asked to verify something, it's more likely than not an identification, and so there's that contextual bias there as well potentially.
But you reviewed the deposition of Melissa Oberg, correct? Eric Warren.
Yes, I did.
And she testified that she had all of her in 2022/2021, she had all of her examinations, whether it was inconclusive or an identification or an exclusion, she had all of her conclusions verified by a verifier. Isn't that her testimony?
That is not my recollection. I believe she said that the lab was moving that direction and that was what she supported and would try to do, but I don't believe, at least as I sit here right now, I do not recall her saying that was done on every single one of her cases.
And you weren't there for her testimony before this jury where she said that, in fact, all of her verification she asked for verification on any conclusion she reaches. You weren't there for that testimony, were you?
I don't know the context for that testimony and I was not here for it.
You are familiar with the name Mark Kiesler, the verifier in this case, are you not?
I am familiar with his name, yes.
How do you know who he is?
So I believe he was and still is potentially the supervisor at one of the ISP crime laboratories and he was also a past president I believe. Again, I'm not 100% certain on that and he has also published some articles in the AFT journal as well.
Past president of who? Of what?
Of AFT. I'm sorry if I did not state that.
Thank you. No further questions. Eric Warren.
Are you aware that the ejector from Mr. Allen's firearm had a recessed portion which caused individual characteristics in the cartridges and similar to the cartridge found on February 13, 2017?
So generally the extractor has a recess. It's essentially a claw, so this, if you were looking down from the top on the gun, this is what the extractor would look like, and there's a groove on the cartridge that it will grab to extract and pull it out when the slide is cycled, whether through firing or manually. So generally, yes, that is the way that it works. The question that is still a question because of the lack of documentation is that surface amenable to individual characteristics or is it like what was observed on the ejector, also having those gross, continuous, uniformly spaced markings that lead to the marks that are present on the cartridges or cartridge cases fired in that, or run through that particular firearm?
Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell. Eric Warren.
What you can take from the report is that when she saw indications of subclass, she noted them, correct?
No. When she saw them for the ejector, she noted them, yes, that is true for the ejector.
You don't know that she saw them on the extractor or the chamber face, do you?
That is correct. I do not know because it was not documented. Eric Warren.
No further questions. Eric Warren.
Is it normal practice for you to not issue a report when conducting examinations or consultations as you did for this case?
Yes, that is. I would say probably greater than 50% of the time, the reports typically occur if I'm doing an actual examination of the evidence because I will list, just like what all the crime labs do, list the evidence that was examined and what those results were.
Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell.
No questions.
What are the chances that the cartridge found at the scene would have the same subclass markings as the Indiana State Crime Lab test results?
That's a great question. We, unfortunately, don't have statistics for that. There are so many guns that get manufactured and we can only collect so many of them. I would say that because of this idea of the consecutive manufactured parts, so generally when a firearm manufacturer is making firearms, that manufacturing process occurs, they build up some certain amount of stock, they wrap the pallet and send it to a location, and then all of those at least start out their lives in the same general area, so the chance of any Sig Sauer in this area is going to have a higher likelihood of having subclass than let's say guns that got shipped to Florida, at least initially when the firearm starts its life and leaves the factory. Eric Warren.
Mr. Rossi.
No questions.
Mr. Luttrell. Eric Warren.
Dr. Warren, the ejector is made by its own machine, correct?
Yes, so in order for something to be manufactured, a machine has to do that.
And the extractor is made by a different machine, correct?
Not necessarily no, but it could be.
And the chamber face or the barrel hood is made by a whole other machine, correct?
Again, not necessarily, but it could be.
No further questions.
Thank you, Doctor. You may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a little bit late, but we are gonna go ahead and break for lunch. While you're outside the courtroom, please keep your minds open. Please don't form any opinions or conclusions about anything. You may discuss the evidence, but please, only do that if all 15 of you are present in the jury room at the same time, and then please don't deliberate. Gentlemen.
All rise.
Jury out at 12:42 p.m.
All right. Let's be back at 1:45. Jody, you can go. Eric Warren off the record.
Off record at 12:43 p.m. On record at 1:46 p.m.
All right. We are back on the record. Is the defense ready to proceed? Yes, Your Honor. Oh. Yes?
Yeah, Judge. I have an exhibit, which think is GGG, that I've redacted the portion of it that we discussed yesterday. This is the letter.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just gonna publish it, if that's okay with the court, once the jury gets back in.
And that would be HHH.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the printout. No, wait, GGG, that's right. GGG is the letter, HHH is the printout. You didn't admit HHH. And did we? I admitted it as a redacted version. Did you want the unredacted version for purposes of the record?
Yeah, it's already marked, so let's do that, too.
Okay. Okay.
I think I've made some arguments at the sidebar.
You did, but I think we should probably have the unredacted, and if we don't have that, okay, so we have the unredacted version. Okay. Eric Warren.
Did you mark the page behind it, also? Court reporter, no. Okay, I thought maybe you said she marked it HHH.
No, it was G2 pages, it was the letter and the envelope. Court reporter, yeah.
So that was...
Okay. So you now have copies for the jury.
Yes, ma'am. This one needs to be marked, cause we're gonna mark both of them now that this one's...
That's GGG.
Submitted and denied or...
No, I admitted it. I admitted it with the understanding that you were gonna provide a redacted copy.
Oh, okay.
To the jury.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah. No, I admitted GGG, but it was the comments that we were having over here about all of the other information in there that was objected to by, I think, Ms. Diener.
You're just giving me my copy back is what you're doing? Court reporter, yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So with that understanding, Eric Warren, when the jury comes back in, you'll ask to publish GGG. And then, are we ready to go? Yes. Are you doing the next witness? I am, Your Honor. Okay. I just have some exhibits I was going to ask. Okay. To be marked.
Judge, from the state's perspective, I believe the next witness is gonna be a phone expert, and the state would ask for an exception from separation of witnesses to have Christopher Cecil and Brian Bunner sit in on that testimony for rebuttal purposes.
Any problem with that? Did you ask? I'm asking defense generally, is there any concerns about that? No. Okay. So yeah, that's be fine.
Okay. I'm gonna bring them in, Judge, before the jury gets in.
Okay. All right. Okay. Are you ready then, Ms. Auger? Yes, Your Honor. Hey, Mr. Rossi, do you have an extra copy of the...
All rise.
Jury in at 1:52 p.m.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Gentlemen. Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope lunch was okay. We are ready to continue. Ms. Auger, you may call your next witness. Thank you, Your Honor.
Judge, can I move? Go ahead and publish.
Oh, yes. Hold on. I apologize. Yes. I'll go get her while that's... Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna publish now Defendant's Exhibit GGG. Defendant's Exhibit GGG published.
Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize, Mr. Rossi. Those are the extra copies.
Oh, thanks.
All right, Ms. Auger, you may call your next witness. Thank you, Your Honor. Stacy Eldridge.
Witness sworn.
Stacy, can you, please, give us your full name?